that I'm used to the climate. I think that if man ever found a place to live easy and happy, that Eden is on Puget Sound. Eden is on Puget Sound. That Eden is on Puget Sound. A place to live easy and happy. That Eden is on Puget Sound.
Hello and welcome to the Seattle Files. My name is Chris Allen. I'm your host. Every week I get together with a different local comedian, and together we discuss the strange, unusual, interesting, and oftentimes lesser-known aspects of our local history. Joining me today on the program is Steve Lange. How's it going, Steve?
Going good. What's going on, man?
Not a lot, man. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve is an ensemble member in Jet City Improv. He is an actor and comedian who performs all around Seattle on a very regular basis. He is also a filmmaker and director of the horror comedy movies Junk Bucket and Junk Bonds: The Return of Junk Bucket, which are on the horror festival film festival circuit right now. You want to tell us a little bit about the movies?
Sure. They're basically, the first one's a satire of the Friday the 13th series.
Mm-hmm.
The second one's a satire of the Texas Chainsaw series. Both involve a bucket-headed mongoloid who enjoys cutting off and eating people's phalluses.
That's
starring a large contingency of the Jet City Improv cast.
Yes, a lot of local comedians in that.
And will be released in June, so hopefully you can check it out.
Cool. When is it going to be released?
It'll be in June on Troma's website, Troma, if people know Troma Films out there, and then in July worldwide.
Cool. Awesome.
Let's hope so. Knock on wood.
Knock on wood, yeah. How long have you lived in the Seattle area?
It's been a little over a dozen years now.
Okay. Where are you from originally?
I hail from Cincinnati, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also lived in New York, Charleston, South Carolina, and Chicago before I came here.
The big three?
Yeah, I guess.
What brought you out here?
I was watching a lot of Twin Peaks at the time, and I really didn't have a better idea of where to move. And I was like, well, I can come visit and at least check out the shooting locations, and if nothing else, get that out of it. And then 12 years later, still here.
Cool. Did you go to like Tweed's Diner and?
Oh yeah,
and,
definitely.
all the
Snoqualmie Falls,
nice.
Places I still frequent.
Awesome. Yeah, I love Tweed's. That place is awesome.
Oh yeah.
And how much do you know about local history?
I'm ashamed to admit a paltry sum.
Okay, that's not an uncommon tale.
So I'll be learning a bunch today.
Great, cool. And you have no idea what we're going to be talking about
today?
No,
you forbid me from knowing.
That's an ominous way of putting it, that I wouldn't tell you what we were talking about.
I mean, you know.
Yeah, you did contact me like a week ago, like, tell me what it's going to be, so I can study
just
up
in
on
case I can bone up a little bit.
No. I usually want people to come in cold.
Yes, I am blank slate.
Awesome. So let's get started. Mark Matthews was born September 24th, 1867 in Calhoun, Georgia, just after the end of the Civil War. He grew up the son of a carriage maker, and the war had been particularly hard on the family. Mark grew up in abject poverty. His mother had been pregnant 10 times, and by the time Mark was born, he was the only child to survive infancy.
Oh, that's not a good average.
No, it's not. No. It's a rough upbringing.
Yeah, medical technology is a good thing that's happened.
Yeah, and infant mortality rate was high, but that's
extreme.
That's real high, yes.
A 10% return is not so good for the effort.
The family shop had been destroyed during the Civil War. They're not doing well. He spent much of his youth listening to fire and brimstone sermons by traveling preachers in tents. Southern revivalism was in full swing, and Mark was right in the center of it. As a young man, he worked a variety of jobs, working at a newspaper and selling musical instruments.
Oh.
Hustling.
Yeah.
Doing what he needs to do. At age 13, he began preparing for a career in ministry.
As you would.
Yes. He later said, quote, "I was regenerated when 13 years of age. The call to preach was as clear and as definite as it could possibly be. I announced to my parents and friends that my life was directed to God's ministry." He did not attend a formal seminary, but studied with pastors at local churches. Quote, "I would go to church before the hour for the services, gather up hymn books, and give them to the people as they entered the building for worship, ring the bell, or do any kind of work."
Yes.
He's a driven young man.
Well, I guess if you're facing those circumstances, you got to do what you got to do.
Become very religious.
Yes.
Yeah.
Got to grasp onto something. I guess.
not entirely out of the realm of explanation for why one would become very religious. If you're growing up and you're 9 of your siblings have died.
Yes, hope is hard to find.
Yes. In 1886, at the age of 19, Matthews began preaching. He traveled the South for a time, preaching in Dalton, Georgia, and Jackson, Tennessee. He was 6'5", and exuded a commanding and persuasive presence.
I assume.
Yeah. I'd listen to a guy who's 6'5".
Yeah, especially if he's on a pulpit.
Yeah. He moved to Seattle in 1902. He felt the fact the city was so young meant it was malleable to be formed with Christian values. And its location... Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, it's a wild frontier town.
Yes.
Everybody's
It's
drinking.
malleable. They're able to be shaped.
Yeah. Well, the kind of tenor of the city is what he's going for.
Yes.
Yeah, so loggers and miners and prostitutes out here that are occupying the space.
Yeah.
Bring them to God.
Folks just looking for God.
Yeah. Its location could provide the perfect base for sending missionaries to Asia and spreading Christianity around the world.
Which we like to do.
Yeah, the Pacific Rim. Shortly after moving to Seattle, he married Grace Jones, and they had 2 children together, Gladys and Mark Jr. Within a few months, the new preacher became a popular figure amongst the religious in Seattle. His sermons typically covered one of 3 categories. 1, complete and utter surrender to Jesus Christ as your personal savior, which I believe is a very common theme with sermons.
That tends to run through.
Yeah. 2, abstinence from vice, so no drinking, no gambling, no fornication.
Another very hard sell for the prostitutes.
And 3, a call to arms to be involved in the politics of Seattle. He preached against businesses that, quote, extort money from the common people. He criticized an ambulance system that he thought was not run in the best interests of the citizen, and he preached against a manufacturing plant that produced contaminated ketchup.
Well, as well we all should.
Yeah. If you're producing contaminated ketchup.
I'm not sure what the Lord has to do with that, but...
Well, it's if you believe in doing what's good for everyone and you believe in promoting...
Clean up the ketchup for the Lord.
Well-being towards your fellow man, you don't want your fellow man eating contaminated ketchup.
No, that's true.
Yeah. But it's a very specific thing to be called upon to do.
Oh, and just for the rest of the story, I will be picturing Grace Jones as Grace Jones.
That's Grace Jones, yeah.
Modern
Of course,
Jones.
yes.
I invite you all to do the same.
Yes, I think we're all on board with that. This combination between religion and politics made him a highly controversial and highly influential figure around Seattle. So politicians and businessmen that are making a profit off of all this less than stringent best interest of the common people are probably not liking this too much.
No.
That he's
Well, yeah, they're harsh. He's harshing their gig.
he is harshing their kid.
So to speak.
Matthews ran the first Presbyterian church in Seattle, which had been founded in 1869. The church provided nursery care for working mothers, unemployment classes in the evening, and employed a Japanese minister who taught language classes, especially notable in the time of widespread anti-Asian sentiment in the United States.
Well, that whole thing sounds rather progressive.
Oh, very much so, yeah. He's very much in favor of labor, favor of the working man, favor of helping mothers take care of their children. Yeah, no, he's a very polarizing figure because he's some people love him, some people hate him, and very complex as well. So he's in spite of his progressive views towards Asian, he never extended the same feeling towards African Americans. He was always pretty racist, owing in large part to his post-Civil War Southern upbringing.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
So just like a lot of people, he's very complicated.
Sure.
You know, he's got these very progressive ideals and these very regressive ideals. Reverend Matthews continued to encourage his parishioners to become active in politics. He published pamphlets with recommended candidates, organized voters' bureaus, and publicly called out politicians who he believed to be corrupt. Which is, another gonna make you some enemies.
Yeah, exactly.
On January 30th, 1905, Matthews went before the city council to make his accusations against the members he felt were using their position for personal gain. He claimed the council had not allowed the Snoqualmie Power Company to compete with the Seattle Electric Company for a contract. He claimed the election of Hiram Gill to president of the council was an act of chicanery, and that the council was influencing the granting of liquor license unfairly and allowing construction companies to fix prices.
So that help with my Comcast bill.
Yeah, well, nothing can help with Comcast bill. Oh, yeah, Comcast, it's the worst. So these aren't necessarily the sexiest of allegations, but it's still allegations of corruption, price fixing, being in cahoots with these businesses, and chicanery, which is something you don't hear very often about anymore.
Well, it was outlawed, in the 1800s.
It was, yeah. I think it was always illegal.
Yes, there's very little chicanery around.
Yeah, not a lot of chickens running around. Hiram Gill did not take these allegations well. After Matthews levied 19 charges against him, Gill responded by losing his cool and blurting out that he believed Matthews was run out of Tennessee for running a crap game.
Whoa.
Gill said, quote, "He was run out of his state, and the people in the country in which he was raised would not let him stay there a minute if he went back there today. I know his reputation. When he came here, he was entangled with a disreputable woman of the underworld, and went down there to see her regularly. He is still going, too, in close hacks with the curtains drawn. Had it not been for the desire to save the name and family of a young girl from disgrace, he would have been in the penitentiary today."
Snap.
Snap indeed.
Blaming it all on a woman.
It's that's a big allegation to make against a prominent pastor.
Yeah.
But he's making big allegations against the city council.
Yeah, sure.
So we have the pulpit and we have the council kind of lobbing these insults at each other.
I like that she's a woman of the underworld.
Yes. All of the, if you look back at old newspapers from this time period, it's all about like fallen women and women of the underworld and ladies of ill repute.
It's actually my favorite magazine is Women of the Underworld.
Women of the Underworld, yes. Yeah. Yeah, you can't find a good copy of it these days, though. The magazine stands are all just publishing Maxim and...
It's true.
Yeah. The Seattle Star called it the most dramatic moment in the history of the city council. Gill's claims were unfounded, but so were Matthews. The statements he made of impropriety of the council were deemed unsatisfactory by the prosecuting attorney to call for a grand jury investigation.
Huh.
So it's a whole lot of nothing.
Right.
They're all lobbying these accusations, but never goes to criminal
was
charges.
it actually nothing, or
There's probably some stuff going on. It's really unclear whether or not Matthews ever had this relationship with the women of the underworld.
Trouble, I guess.
Sorry?
Because I guess why go through all the trouble if your accusations aren't founded? If you're Matthews,
Right? Well, he's throwing this stuff at Gill. Gill is throwing this stuff at him, and there's a lot of corruption in the city council at this time. If you want to learn more about Hiram Gill, check out. There's a whole episode on Hiram Gill that has not been released as of this recording. But yeah, check out that. Hiram Gill is a very crazy and interesting figure. This also occurred at the most dramatic moment in the history of the city council. The claims were unfounded. Both Gill and Matthews survived the incident politically, but it began what would become an ongoing feud between two of the most powerful men in the city. In 1883, so we're going back in time here. 1883, years before Reverend Mark Matthews showed up, women in Washington gained the right to vote. But it was repealed in 1888.
Oh.
So suffrage
That didn't
happens.
last long.
Suffrage happens for a very short period of time in the 1880s. Basically, the men don't like what the women are doing with the political power, so they repeal.
Take it back.
Yeah, it's a kind of.
Well,
I
when I moved here, I said I'd give it 5 years. So
give it 5 years to live
why
here.
not give women 5 years?
Give women 5 years to vote, see what they do.
Yeah, take it away.
Yeah, they wanted reform to happen in places
Weird.
that. Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Who would've thunk?
That people would want reform when they got the right to vote?
Oh well, silly them. Shows what they got then.
10 years before the passing of the 19th Amendment, women's suffrage was a hot-button issue in Washington. So this is 1910. Matthews adamantly opposed the rights of women to vote, fearing that if women were given the right to participate in government, it would lead to the deterioration of the sanctity of the home.
Which it has, obviously.
Clearly, yeah.
Sorry, I'm kidding, women out there.
Right. Well, it's interesting. A lot of times, religion is so often used as like, we need to keep this stuff back. Right. It will deteriorate the home if we allow social progress to happen.
Yes.
He preached against women's suffrage. He said, quote, "This country will never adopt female suffrage. If the ballot were extended to the women of the star, if the ballot were extended to the women, the star of America's glory would go down immediately and never rise again."
Wow, that's grim.
The deluded women who cry for their quote-unquote right of the ballot do not seem to understand that the right to vote is not an inalienable right. Universal suffrage is wrong in theory and would be a curse in practice. The advocates of female suffrage are, many of them, advocates of divorce, small families, few household responsibilities, and no children, all of which is unwomanly and dangerous.
Wow, I feel bad for his wife, if she existed.
Grace Jones?
Female family members, yes.
Yeah, well, you can't have a small family, because that's unwomanly, apparently. No gallant, patriotic, chivalric man can afford to vote for or advocate female suffrage, because whenever you put burdens upon women which will compel them to neglect their duties as mothers or absent themselves from their home obligations, you will undermine the government, destroy the Constitution, and wreck the nation.
Man. Not one to mince words.
I'm just glad he's not being hyperbolic about this.
Just a little bit, maybe.
Just everything. If women get the right to vote, society will
Human
crumble.
race as we know it will.
Yeah,
fall off.
exactly. The sun will turn into a black hole, suck in, and we'll just start over with a new Earth. That's what God will have happen. When suffrage passed in Washington in 1910, a decade before it passed nationally, Matthews accepted it, and he went on to criticize the University of Washington for underrepresenting women in academia. He preached for equal pay for women on the faculty and said that only having 12 women on a 137-member faculty was inadequate representation.
Sounds right.
Yeah. It's just interesting because he's so anti-suffrage,
yes.
But then he's saying you need to pay women equally and have women be more represented.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you reconcile
academia.
that in your own head.
I don't either.
Unless you just have really specific ideas of what women can do.
I think he did, yeah. I think it was a very clear, well-defined line in his brain about what women can and cannot do.
Maybe he missed his calling. Maybe he should have been a therapist, but only to the female sex. He could have perhaps directed them to find their specific lot in this life, since he seems to know it so well.
He's got a pretty good mental map of what he thinks, a woman's life should look like. He probably would have been pretty anti-therapy.
Oh, yeah, good point.
I think this is a little before that started to become widespread at all. But yeah, he, for probably like psychology, no.
Sure. Yes, generally religion and psychology don't go together.
He continued to oppose women as preachers. So women can't vote, they can't be preachers, they can be academia in academia, and they should be able to have the same.
But you cannot preach.
And and that he still supplies childcare for working mothers in the church. So it is
It's a confusing man.
It seems so self-contradictory, but it probably is very much in line with what a lot of people would have believed at the time. You know, progress comes slow, so it's women can be in academia, but they can't vote. Okay, women can be in academia and vote, but they can't.
Right, it's all rungs on a ladder, I suppose.
Yeah. Matthews frequently attacked Hiram Gill in his sermons, especially when Gill was elected mayor in 1910. Gill was running on an open city platform, saying that one should be lenient towards drinking, gambling, and prostitution as long as it was contained to its own part of town south of Yesler Way. So everything south of Yesler Way...
The wrong side of Detroit.
Oh, very much so, yeah. Everything south of Yesler Way was called the restricted district.
Mm.
And really, that's where all the brothels were.
Right, fun
that's
time.
Where, yeah. That's where you want to go. If
it
you're
still is.
Yeah, it kind of is, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was it was where all the brothels and saloons and stuff were, and then it was the gay part of town for a long time, and now it's where you can get a condo for $1.5 million.
Yeah.
And then still have your place smell like urine wafting up from the streets.
Yeah, Seattle real estate.
Yeah, it's an interesting transition happening right now. So Gill is running as an open city advocate. He appointed notoriously corrupt Charles Whoppy Wappenstein as police chief. He was called Whoppy.
That's too good to be true.
It is true. Gill was anti-union and in general the exact opposite politically of Mark Matthews. So Matthews is pro-labor, pro-union. An effort was soon underway to hold a recall election of Hiram Gill. The Public Welfare League of Seattle started circulating a petition to recall the mayor. Matthews organized the local clergy and encouraged his own congregation to sign a petition and vote to recall Hiram Gill. Matthews wrote a personal letter to Gill asking him to resign and expressing concern about his soul.
I'm sure he was deeply concerned about it.
Yeah, it's a little condescending.
Exactly. When it's kind of your arch nemesis there.
Yeah, Gill said he wanted bands to play on Sunday, which was a bold statement at the time. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Sunday was the Lord's Day, but he said, yes, I want this town wide open. I want bands playing on Sunday. So when we talk about stuff like the teen dance ordinance and trying to crack down on venues,
it's got a history.
Yeah, it comes back to this.
Wow.
The petition gained enough signatures, and the election was to be held on February 7th, 1911. A few days before the recall election, Matthews wrote a front-page editorial for the Post-Intelligencer, saying in part, quote, "Every ballot cast will be either for or against righteousness, civic purity, and law enforcement. There isn't the slightest doubt in the minds of the general public of the fact of police graft, chicanery, double-crossing, and the infraction of the law at the investigation of the authorities."
Oh, he had me at chicanery.
Yeah. So anytime you bring up chicanery,
It's black and white.
Yeah, it's a hot button. It's a hot button word. It's divisive. During the months preceding the recall election, Matthews, hired the Williams-Burns Detective Agency in secret, using money borrowed against his insurance to investigate Gill and Wappenstein. He told no one about this, and planned to use the information publicly only in the event that Gill was not recalled. So he's behind closed
He's got it in
doors.
his pocket,
Yeah.
just in case.
It's not really a pious and
No,
you wouldn't think Christianly thing to do.
but sometimes you gotta win. I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's true. He did not wish to publicly humiliate his opponent, but would rather Gill either resign or be recalled before using the information he had learned. So it's kind of a second option.
Sure.
On the day of the recall, women who had just been granted the right to vote voted against Gill in massive numbers. A reported 500 prostitutes were brought in to vote by limousine and all voted for Gill. Because they want to be able to continue doing business.
Yes.
Hiram Gill was the first mayor of a major American city to be recalled in a special election. Matthews had fought adamantly against women's suffrage now and had the votes of women largely to thank for it. Kind of ironic that he fought so hard against women having the right to vote, and now the votes of these women are what turned the tide and got him his political victory.
Well, did that sway him at all, or did he stay true to his ideals?
He accepted it. He accepted that women got the right to vote. I don't think he was ever really happy about it.
Well, and I guess once the whole country catches on,
Yeah, by 1920, everybody in America or all women in America.
It's not a
are-
battle you're going to win anymore.
The Burns Detective Agency brought the information they had gathered in their investigation to prosecuting attorney John Murphy, who began proceedings to indict Wappenstein on corruption charges. To this day, it is unclear if the detective agency did this on their own or with the consent of Matthews. So we don't know. We probably never will know. Matthews was promoted prohibition from day one and encouraged his congregation to stay away from alcohol. The saloon was, quote, the most fiendish, corrupt, and hell-soaked institution.
Damn straight.
Hell-soaked institution that ever crawled out of the slime of the eternal pit.
Wow.
Yeah, he is very
He's been to
anti-booze.
some shitty bars.
Well, if you go down to bars in Pioneer Square, even today, they're,
That's an apt description.
yeah, $25 for a martini?
This is ludicrous.
The two great political parties are rum-soaked, saloon-cursed, and without conscience on the question of the abolition of this great enemy. I love this inflammatory rhetoric. It's that fire and brimstone. Statewide prohibition went into effect in 1916, a few years before the rest of the country. So prohibition started here. A bunch of states were adopting it.
It surprises me, I guess.
That we adopted.
That we were ahead of the curve on that.
We were ahead of the curve, yeah. I think it's once enough number of states adopted prohibition, that's when it became national. 30% of voters in Seattle voted to ban alcohol, due in large parts to the effort of Reverend Matthews. He's very influential. Now, in June 10th, 1918, at Washington Hall on 14th Avenue and 1st Street in Seattle, Miss Lillian Smith's jazz band played a concert. It was the first documented jazz performance in Seattle. What do you think he's going to feel about jazz?
That it's going to set hellfire upon all of us.
You're damn right, yeah.
Calling the devil.
The new musical form began gaining popularity nationwide. Matthews claimed, quote, jazz is an evidence of intellectual and moral degradation.
Well, and he's not a fan of the culture that tends to propagate jazz in that time either.
Yeah,
so
he's
being racist as he is.
Yeah, he is. He does not like African Americans, and it is largely an African American art form, especially at this time. So yes, he does not like jazz. June 13th, 1921, the Seattle Daily Times had a front page headline reading, quote, is jazz menace to civilization? Question mark. Worse than booze, says club women.
Wow.
Jazz, quote, is a menace as serious as the narcotic menace and even worse than liquor. The music chairman of the General Federation of Women's Clubs said, quote, as dearly as I loved music, she would rather see it wiped out of existence than to have it succumb to jazz.
Oh man, like jazz is just going to take music down with it.
Yeah. Better silence than
Yes,
jazz.
one bad genre spoils the bunch.
It really does, yeah. You can't enjoy your classical music if you know somewhere on the other side of town someone is listening to jazz music.
Making music without rules.
Yeah, right. It's just the notes they don't play. What is that?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That's the devil's notes.
I don't understand it. I actually don't understand jazz.
I don't.
The racism of jazz persecution is not hard to see today. The Time series on jazz went on to say, quote, As the savage beats a tom-tom and sways and oscillates the body until he produces an excitement or irritation of his nervous system or a condition of self-hypnotism, as in religious music and dancing of African and Indian tribes. In either case, it is physical exaltation. Jazz music, and with its accompanying jazz dancing, is a return to the primitive. The savage uses his music not as an amusement, but as a stimulant as alcohol is used, for its physical effect alone.
See, like, that all sounds good to me.
Doesn't that sound awesome?
I'm not deeply religious, man.
Well, it's like, oh, I can listen to music and I can have the same effects as alcohol, but I don't get hungover and
exactly.
I can still drive.
And since it's prohibition anyway, I can't drink, so.
Yeah, it sounds great, really. That actually makes it sound pretty amazing.
Audio alcohol.
Yeah, maybe I do understand jazz. State Representative William Allen, also originally from Georgia, introduced House Bill 194, better known as the Jazz Intoxication Measure. The Seattle Daily Times reported the purpose of the bill was to create a commission, quote, to survey the havoc being wrought on society as a result of jazz intoxication. If it be found that our people are becoming dangerously demented, confused, distracted, or bewildered by jazz music, the commission should recommend that the governor act to bring about immediate cessation. All persons convicted of being jazzily intoxicated shall go before the Supreme Court and be sent to an insane asylum.
What?
Yeah.
Oh man, jazz hands were not a thing to do.
No.
That would be surefire.
That would be, if you have jazz hands, they'll tackle you to the ground.
So how do they register how jazzy you are? Like, what's borderline of too jazzy and not jazzy enough to be insane?
Like a jazzalizer test?
Yeah, like a jazzilator or something.
That's where jazzercise started from.
Shut up!
They would have people jazzercise.
Is that what we've been building towards this whole time?
Yes, this is the dawn of jazzercise.
Well, then it is a topic I know about.
Yes. Oh, do you jazzercise?
I did it, but when I grew up in the 80s, I used to take a swim class at the Y, and my mom would jazzercise, but her class would last longer than mine, so I'd have to sit there and watch it.
Oh, okay.
It's a lot of Huey Lewis.
Yeah, that's what you danced to in the 80s.
That's what passed for jazz in the mid-80s in Cincinnati was Huey Lewis.
Yeah.
The heart of rock
and roll is the beat. Yeah.
It takes me back.
Not the heart of jazz is the beat.
No.
Yeah, I remember my mom had one of those Jane Fonda workout tapes, and it was the same, like...
It's all just very brightly, striped leotards.
Everybody is super, fluorescent and neon, everything.
I don't miss that aesthetic.
No?
Not so much.
All right. The bill never went to a vote.
Oh.
So the jazz intoxication measure
never
died on the floor.
Oh, good. As well it should.
Yes. In 1922, Matthews established KTW Radio, the first church-owned radio station in the country. The station broadcasted his sermons and continued to spread his influence. Due largely to the success of the radio station in 1924, he was deemed one of the 25 most influential pastors in the country.
Wow.
In his later life, he worked firsthand with unions and labor leaders. In the 1930s, he preached against communism and was extremely critical of Germany's rising anti-Semitism. So a lot of really not so great things about him, but at the same time, he has some pretty redeeming...
He's very selective about which races and what he thinks the sex is capable of.
He's incredibly specific.
I mean, in a way, I guess that makes me admire him more than if he was just blanketly ignorant.
If he was just a huge asshole.
Yeah. You can at least be a complicated asshole.
And that comes into the question of how much can we judge somebody based on the time they're in.
Sure.
Because if he's growing up in the South, right after the Civil War, he's growing up in an incredibly racist area and time.
Well, and it's a lot to hope from someone when you have absolutely no influences that are telling you anything contradictory. To just come up with it on your own is, not everyone can be Gandhi.
Right, yeah. And how we watch movies that are made now that take place during a specific time period, they always have the protagonist that we're supposed to sympathize with take non-traditional views towards race and sex that people at that time would not have been accustomed to. And if we don't have that, then we don't identify with that. It's just an interesting, how much can we judge him for being a product of his time, and how much can we exalt him for the good things he does? Yeah, it's a weird,
because cumulatively he did some good.
Yeah. He's complex. I mean, it's really easy to turn people into black and white. Right and wrong, this and that. But yeah, he's a very complex figure. He died in 1940. The Seattle Times wrote, quote, "Far beyond the limits of his own congregation, the death of Mark Allison Matthews is deeply mourned. The shadow falls upon the whole country, for he was personally known in many parts of it, and known by name and reputation in all. Dr. Matthews was a fighter from the beginning to the end of his life's work, and it was with no cessation of that fight that he also fought for the general welfare of his fellow men, for the physical and economic health of the people, for community decency and civic righteousness." Today there is a statue of Reverend Mark Matthews in Denny Park.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it's one of those many statues around town that
Yeah.
it's a guy that's like, this person was really important, but nobody's ever heard of
right.
him.
And I've
Yeah.
probably been like, who the hell's that?
Right,
And
yeah.
now I know.
Yeah, so that's who the statue in Denny Park is.
Crazy.
Of Reverend Mark Matthews.
Well, then he's at least remembered with some reverence then.
He is.
No pun intended.
Yeah. The thing that I kept coming back to when researching this story was Mark Driscoll.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of parallels between this guy and Mark Driscoll.
Sure.
Big mega church, big broadcasting, big,
It's just different technology at their disposal,
yeah,
really.
different. Reverend Mark Matthews probably wasn't wearing Ed Hardy and didn't have a faux hawk.
Let's hope not.
But controversial figures, big, influential, powerful figures
Yep.
that are highly controversial, that are very progressive in some ways and very regressive in other ways.
Yes, not totally hateable, but not totally admirable either.
Yeah, yeah. And Mark Driscoll had, his charges of corruption and
Sure.
using church funds for inappropriate means and plagiarism and things like that. So yeah, it's very interesting to kind of see the parallels between Mark Matthews and Mark Driscoll, 100 years separated.
Yeah.
But Mark Matthews didn't have a big fall. He stayed in power essentially.
Hence he's got a statue.
Yeah, he
I
didn't
don't think we'll be seeing a Mark Driscoll.
probably not. Yeah, he didn't have
That's okay.
a whole bunch of churches that were then broken up into smaller churches.
No.
Yeah, at least I didn't find that in my research.
Sure.
But yeah, but it's an interesting. It's just an interesting story because what can we really think about this guy who had these really progressive views towards women in the workplace, but also said women shouldn't have the right to vote,
Right.
and was very progressive in his attitude towards certain racial integrations and the exact opposite with other.
Yeah, it's certainly not common.
Yeah. He was a fascinating guy for sure. And you can go visit that statue in Denny Park.
And I shall.
And you shall, yes. And he was married to Grace Jones.
Yes. Who is a queen amongst women, as we all know.
Well, thank you for listening to the Seattle Files. Thank you so much, Steve, for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. I learned a lot. So.
Oh, excellent. I'll be back every Tuesday with a new episode, so be sure to check back often. If you have a topic suggestion that you would like to hear an episode about, shoot me an email at theseattlefiles@gmail.com. Like us on Facebook, if you are on Facebook, and you probably are because everybody's on Facebook these days. Like the page, The Seattle Files with Chris Allen. The website is theseattlefiles.com, and be sure to subscribe and rate in iTunes if you're available to do that. I'll be back next week with a new topic and a new guest. Thank you for listening. New guest. Thank you for listening. New guest. Thank you for listening. New guest. Thank you for listening.